Hello, everybody. Now it's time to listen to chapter 11 in the story about John, and the chapter is called A Man of Character. God didn't only use John Lake to heal sick people. Since John's baptism in the Holy Spirit, he became more like Jesus, showing love to all people. He worked to the very point of exhaustion in South Africa because he loved the people. If anyone asked him to come and pray for them, he would go. He never turned away anyone who was sick, even if they came in the middle of the night. John loved people very much and did not hold grudges against those who wronged him. One Christian man had something against John. John had often spoken about what a great Christian man this man was, how he loved God and was a real servant of the Lord. In spite of this, the man still had something against John. One time, he wrote a 24-page letter to John to let him know about the issue. When John got it, he could have been angry. He could even have refused to speak to the man, but instead, John went to see him. The man could not believe it. John had come to his home. He thought John would never want to speak to him again, but instead, John went to make peace. God had given John great authority in the church. John did not use that authority to tear people down. Instead, he wanted every Christian to understand that they were kings and queens before God. He did not want to be the superstar preacher. He wanted the whole church to show Jesus to the world. Of course, John was still human. He still had to fight with himself sometimes to do the right thing. One day, someone had annoyed John so much that he decided to write them a letter. He lay on his bed imagining the letter he would write. One of the things he wanted to write went something like this: "You great big cow, grow up, be a man and stop annoying me." John knew this was not what Jesus would want. After a little more thought, he went to his secretary and dictated a letter. When she had written the letter, she gave it to him to sign. As he read through it, he realized that although it started off okay, there was still a nasty tone in the letter and it wasn't very nice. So he didn't sign the letter. Instead, he went upstairs to pray to Jesus. 20 minutes into this prayer, the phone rang. It was the same man on the phone. They agreed to meet and spend the next 3 hours together, and they had a wonderful time. John could have sent the rude letter. In fact, part of him really wanted to send it because he was so annoyed. However, he decided to pray about it first until Jesus had worked in him and he was not annoyed anymore. John was always thinking of other people. He would do anything he could to help others, even if it meant trouble for himself. He simply loved people. Some preachers around John's time would spend time preaching about how evil everyone else was. Their words were full of judgment. But John's aim was to show people how great God was and to let them experience his love and forgiveness. One day, a woman came to see John while he was resting. She begged him to pray for her. She was an alcoholic, and she wanted to be set free. As John looked at her, God showed him something. "Before I can pray for you," he said, We need to talk about the 250 pounds worth of jewelry that you have stolen from another lady. God even gave John the address of the lady's home. The woman broke down in tears. Please don't hand me to the police. Please don't tell the people that I stole it, the woman said. John told her that he would do nothing of that sort. After all, it was God who had shown him. If it wasn't for that, he wouldn't have known anything about it. The lady repented, and John prayed for her. From that day on, she did not drink anymore. Instead, she spent her time working hard for the kingdom and for Jesus. A few days later, a woman came to John. It was the very same woman who had all her jewelry stolen. She wanted to know if the other lady had told John about it, but John refused to tell her anything. Instead, he told her how Jesus could forgive her sins. The lady broke down, wept, and gave her heart to Jesus. As she left, she asked John to let the other lady know that she was forgiven for stealing the jewelry, and it would never be mentioned again. John loved it when people met God. One day, John caught a young man trying to steal his car. He asked the young man what he wanted the car for. The man explained that he wanted to take his girlfriend for a drive. John told the man that he was not planning on using his car until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So if he wanted to, he could borrow his car until then. The man gave John his word, and John gave him the car keys. And sure enough, the young man returned the car on time. Such a love for other people involves a sacrifice. And John was no stranger to sacrifice, and nor were the people that worked for him. In fact, John thought it was because of the huge sacrifice of the people that God kept on pouring out more of His Holy Spirit, His love, and His power. At one point in the ministry, there were 125 workers out across South Africa. Money got really tight, and nobody sent money from overseas, and there was very little money in John's pocket. At the end of each month, he could not even send his workers $10. Then things got even worse, and he could not even afford to send them $2. John was responsible for the lives of these men and their families, and as he could no longer afford to support them, he called them all back home. Even to bring the men back home was a great sacrifice. He and his friends had to sell some of their clothes, some of their furniture, and anything else that they could find to bring everyone together for a conference. At the conference, John shared with his workers how he could no longer support them. They asked him to leave the room so that they could talk about this problem by themselves. When John came back in, he found that they had rearranged the chairs into a circle with a table at one end. On it was some bread and wine ready for communion. One man spoke up for the rest of the group. "We have all decided that we want you to give us communion. We are going to carry on serving Jesus in the places that He has sent us to. We are going to carry on serving Jesus even if we have to walk all the way. We are going to carry on serving Jesus even if we end up starving. We are going to carry on serving Jesus even if our wives die. We are going to carry on serving Jesus even if our children die. We are going to carry on serving Jesus even if it means that we will die ourselves. This work cannot stop because there are too many people out there who still need to hear about Jesus. The man continued, "You are no longer responsible for providing for our needs, John. We only want to ask you to do this one thing for us. If we die, we want you to come and bury us." Just like John had given up everything to follow Jesus, these men were willing to do the same. They knew it was very dangerous and very serious, but the call to preach the gospel was even more important to them than their own lives. In the 12 months that followed, John buried 12 of his best men and 16 of their wives and children. They had lived with barely enough food to eat. If only they had had enough, they would have survived. Jesus died on the cross for us. He gave up his life for us. These men gave up their lives willingly so that others would hear about Jesus and what Jesus has done. There was no greater sacrifice that they could have made. Right in the middle of all these miracles and amazing things that God was doing, there was still great pain and a lot of sacrifice. Not only had John seen his workers die, he had also been persecuted by some people. And don't forget, he had also lost his dear wife Jenny since he had moved to South Africa. Then, in December 1910, only a year after Jenny's death, Tom, John's best friend, felt it was time for him to move on. John and Tom had worked together for years. They had preached together regularly since the time when they had met in the city of Zion, and they had been through many times together and many things. Tom and John were best friends, and now John had to carry on without his support. John was not alone. He still had his workers around him, and more importantly, he still had the call of God to be there. The Holy Spirit was still with him, but he really missed his friend Tom. At times, John wanted to give up, so God sent people to encourage him to keep going. Letters came in from many people thanking him for his ministry. Jesus is more interested in our character than in how much of his power we can display. A strong character is needed most when hard things happen to us. John was not just a man that God used. He was a man of great character. No matter what happened or what he was feeling, John kept on serving God. God could trust John with his power because he knew that John had a very strong character.